All right, so it's July 1865 in Springfield, Missouri. The gunfighter Wild Bill Hickok loses his favorite gold watch in a poker game to Dave Tutt, a gambler who's also been flirting with an old flame of his. Wild Bill hears that the next day, Tutt plans to further humiliate him by showing off his watch in the middle of town. That day, Wild Bill walks into the town square, revolver in hand, and spots Tutt with his watch. The townspeople scatter, and the two men stand alone 75 yards apart. From here, it's a classic quick-draw duel. The men stand sideways with their guns cocked, hands hovering over their holsters. They reach for their guns and fire at the same time. Tutt misses badly, but Wild Bill doesn't. He shoots Tutt between his ribs, killing him. That's one of the only quick-draw duels we can historically verify. This is the story of how Hollywood got the Wild West totally wrong. The myth versus reality. Since the 1860s, Wild West fiction has convinced a lot of people that cowboys spent a good chunk of their time dueling. Cheap fictional books called dime novels, newspapers, and later comics and films took real-life gunfighters like Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp and exaggerated their stories. Cowboys became folk heroes, noble gunslingers shooting down bad guys on a lawless frontier. The actual violence. But there's actually a lot of debate among historians about how violent the Wild West really was. The numbers say American frontier towns were extraordinarily homicidal. But as historian Robert Dykstra points out, the stats can be misleading since we calculate homicide rate by homicides per 100,000 people, meaning that one single homicide in a 500-person frontier town could give you an absurdly high crime rate. Depending on when and where you restrict your sample, you could wind up with homicide rates from 0 to over 1,000. However, even conservative estimates say that the Old West was about as murderous as today's most violent U.S. cities. And this makes sense. Gangs of bandits roamed the frontier, and law enforcement was often weak or corrupt. Cowboys and violence. Cowboys had a role in this violence as well. Skilled gunfighters found work as protection men for cattle companies. Before the days of vast fenced-in ranches, these cowboys rode along the distant edges of ranches and shot cattle thieves on sight. But most importantly, the Wild West combined a culture of gambling and drinking with a bunch of gun-wielding men. The occasional drunken shootout was inevitable. The brutal truth, how it really went down. That's how a lot of violence in the Old West happened. Gunfights were almost never honorable, planned-out duels. They were spontaneous and sloppy. Even Wild Bill Hickok's story doesn't end in a quick-draw duel. He beats Jack McCall in poker, and the next day McCall gets drunk, pushes through the saloon doors, pulls out a revolver, and shoots him while his back is turned. Historian Robert Dearman writes that Wild West gunfights were generally sudden, impromptu affairs, and gunfighters took every advantage available. When Langford Farmer, Peel got into a gunfight over a gambling match. He and his opponent shot each other until they ran out of bullets. Then Peel, with 3 bullets in him, crawled to his opponent and won the duel by stabbing him in the chest with a Bowie knife. The final lesson: Peel recovered, but he lived and died by this kind of no-rules gunfighting. One night at a saloon, he got into an argument with outlaw John Bull. Peel challenged Bull to a duel, but Bull said he needed to go up to his room to get his gun. Eventually, Peel assumed Bull was too afraid to fight and left to see his mistress across the street. She held Peel's right arm while they walked. Suddenly, Bull emerged from the saloon with his gun in hand. Peel tried to grab his own gun, but the woman was still clutching his shooting arm. Bull fired 3 bullets past the mistress and killed Peel. Fiction gets the Wild West duel wrong. Duels weren't formal, clean, or honorable. The people of the frontier were human. They drank booze, broke the law, and lost their temper. The gunfights that actually happened often involved alcohol, gambling, and cheap shots, which is way more appropriate for a place called the Wild West. Outro. So there you have it. The Hollywood version of the Wild West, where noble cowboys face off in honorable quick-draw duels at high noon, is basically complete fiction. The real Wild West was messy, drunk, and brutal. Most gunfights weren't planned duels between honorable men. They were spontaneous bar fights that turned deadly when someone pulled a gun. Wild Bill Hickok's duel with Dave Tutt? That's the exception, not the rule. Most gunfighters died the way Wild Bill himself did, shot in the back while playing poker. The frontier was violent, sure, but not in the romantic way we've been told. It was a kind of violence that comes from mixing alcohol, gambling, guns, and wounded pride in a place with barely any law enforcement. The myth of the Wild West tells us about America's desire for heroic narratives and clear-cut morality. But the reality? It was just people being people, messy, flawed, and sometimes deadly. That's the real Wild West.